awesome, kind of fresh on the board. I think I'm coming up to a year here. As I said, you've come to a very good study session. I think we're going to be led to think about a lot today. But I will say, when I was looking at the title, I was like, this seems a little bit of a downer. I know this is a somber holiday, but I always try to look for the upside. And I said to Evan, I hope we're going to get there. As Evan said, we always get there. We always get to the bright light, to the positive. But today the topic is grieving to grievance. How personal and collective loss can lead to cynicism and hope. So there we are with hope, so that was a good thing. A sense of loss can lead to the widespread cynical view we see today, can also lead to hope. Our world is divided by an anger that's tearing down the very institutions which once provided stability. Where can hope be found when people fear losing their place in this changing world? Evan is going to speak to us about this today. Evan is a Canadian columnist, political journalist, television and radio host. He is, at least for the next few more days, the host of CTV's national political news programs Power Play and Question Period. He also hosts a national radio program, The Evan Solomon Show, and he's a writer of many books. He wants me to hurry up. I will say my kids have asked me to ask him to do a third children's book, if anybody knows who's written that as well. But Evan is leaving CTV. He's leaving our Canadian political landscape here to be the new publisher of G0 Media and member of the Eurasia Group Management Committee in New York City. And that is set to take place in the middle of the month. Ev's going to be coming up here to talk to us today. I know it will be an incredible study session. We did want to say that he is dedicating this Yom Kippur study session to the memory of our late father, a longtime member of Holy Blossom Temple, Carl Solomon.
Thank you. She still says young, little sister, not younger sister. I haven't had an opportunity to be in the new building lecture. I mean, I've been here many times, obviously, but not in this particular building, so it's a great pleasure to be here. And thank you for welcoming me back. My kids and wife are in Ottawa, Montreal, and so it's great to be back here. This is a home for us. I really want to thank Rabbi Splansky, for inviting me. She always has such an open heart. She has been instrumental in so many parts of our lives, from our marriage till now. She's watched our family grow up. We watched respective families grow up. So it's a real pleasure to be here. So I want to thank my sister, who's been a pillar of the community here. And that's great to see her kids. My mom's here. Cousins are here. So they see if you're not ready to be probably not here. Now, I know Rabbi Splansky originally asked me this only lecture about this at a time, but I won't. Palestinian fixer, you hear gunshots, and she said, please put your vest up against the windows, they're going to shoot through the car. So the car speeds up, and Tammy and I have the bulletproof vest up against the window. And Tammy, this is her first true Jewish experience, and she says to me, may I remind you, this is our honeymoon. Anyway, we get there, the shooting stops, it's very tense, as you can imagine. It was very conflicted, like many things in that part of the world. And the next day we had dinner or lunch rather, with Rabbi Marmer. Bullets and rabbis, what a hot honeymoon you're thinking, I'm sure. And we were questioning him, and we said, it's a very conflicted experience. There's lots of different political vectors that are meeting here, and it's fraught with emotion when you see that up close. And we said to Rabbi Marmer, how do you make sense of this? What's your view of all this? What's the answer here? And Rabbi Marmer said something that I've never forgotten. He said, Evan and Tammy, you don't come to Israel to find answers. You come to Israel to be confused at a higher level. And it was a brilliant response, because the seeking of some answer is not really the Jewish response, but to be confused at a very high level, to seek out truth, and to know that there's still uncertainties and to be able to live with that was a really wise thing to say. So the best I can offer you as I do a small talk today, and then I hope we have a discussion, is that you'll be confused at a slightly higher level. And may his memory be a blessing. I miss Rabbi Marmer very much, and I know we all do. I want to start today, and on a cold day in February, when I was outside bundled up in Ottawa during the trucker protest. And I was walking around covering the protesters. They sort of taken over our capital. And it was I was out there for 3 weeks, and I was meeting them every day and spending a long time out there. And some days they would spit at you, and some days they'd call you a Nazi, and some days they'd talk to you, and so it was a very interesting moment. And it was just a few months from when our father, my dad, died. He died in November. And it was a grieving time. In fact, I had also just sort of dodged a medical bullet, thank God. And so I was kind of reflective. I was grieving for the loss of my dad, and just months earlier. And I was confronted with these folks very profoundly, very intimately, and for a long time. And a thought struck me that as I was personally grieving, they were here to grieve for something too. Because they said, we don't trust the government. We don't trust the future. We don't trust the scientists. We don't trust the media. We don't trust anybody. Now I say, why? What happened? They've stolen our freedom. They've stolen our future. They've stolen the things we believe. They've stolen our sense that things are going to get better. And as angry as they were, you could see it was a grieving for a loss of a world that they once thought they had. And I was reflecting on why they had been, I spoke to them. Many of them were teachers and business people. They had kids. These were human beings. And we would meet as human beings. Often the encounter would start like this. F you, Solomon, you're an effing Nazi, you're a virus, you're Trudeau, whatever. And then I would say, my name's Evan, what's your name? And then they would kind of stop because they're Canadian, and then say, oh, it's Charlie. And then I'd say, hey, Charlie, it's Evan, what's up? And he's like, okay. So you're not that guy. Now, okay. Then he'd start talking, and they would. As soon as you humanize it, I said, well, what's going on? He said, well, I'm a veteran of the Afghan war, and I fought for this country, but a lot of we're nervous about the government putting on the drugs because of, in the Gulf War syndrome, the left, there's drugs that we were given that caused us pain. And I was like, oh, that's a very different situation than some people. Some guy said, I can't cross the border, and everyone had a story. Some of them had legitimate, many of them had legitimate beginnings, but what struck me is they began with a true sense of grief and anxiety, but they had gone to a place where it was, I couldn't relate to, right? They had gone to a place where they believed that the media and the government and the scientists and the lawyers and the rich cabal of World Economic Forum people are all in some collusion to press them down. And that they were ready to burn it all down. They had given up their homes. They had come to the nation's capital. They had signed petitions to overthrow the government. I mean, you could read the petition to work with the unelected Senate. And I said, like, what about, why don't you guys just, if you don't like Trudeau, why don't you just, we have an election. He's a minority government. In like 18 months, you could, if you believe elections are real. And they would say that on there. And I say, hey, so I was wondering about the grief. And so I'm trying to understand today about my grief and how they've turned into grievance. And of course, it wasn't new. Around the world, we all see grievance politics has taken hold. Whether it's Brexit, where the United Kingdom separated from the free market of the EU. Essentially, imagine telling all those British kids you can no longer work in Europe. Statistics today, they were warned, we all knew this was going to happen. 4 years ago, the British economy was 90% of the German economy. It's 70% of the German economy today. I mean, it's plummeted. This was not very difficult to figure out. When you cut yourself off on access to a free market, you're going to get hurt. But they were sold of crazy promises about and conspiracy theories about Brussels. Not that it was a perfect market, but the alternative is significantly worse for people. We see it in the United States with the kind of populism. We see it in Sweden. We see it in France. And it's easy to point it out on the right. The right has weaponized this very effectively, a kind of angry populism that has a kind of arson motive on institutions. Elections aren't trustworthy. You see Trump saying really things that are ridiculous. The election was not true. And there's no evidence of that. The court systems don't validate that. But it doesn't matter. Nothing's trustworthy. But the left also has its own side, too. It's not just the right that is prone to this grievance politics. On the left, it's been a remarkable shift, where the left began trying to rectify some wrongs about diversity and welcoming different people into places of power. Soon, they've elevated the need for equality, which I think is real, and to rectify things like institutional racism into a grievance that is very difficult to debate. And the left itself has become, most of us grew up where on university campuses, the left would say, freedom of speech, let people speak. Like even as far back as Stephen Harper, Stephen Harper would say, we don't want these people coming into campuses and speaking, and the left would say freedom of speech. Now, the left is saying, stop speaking. We don't want you to speak. And the right saying, we should let people speak. So we've had a complete polar reversal. So it's now the left that has flipped over. So this notion that there's a competition to see who has the deepest grievance, who's been most victimized. So on the right, you see, I'll give an example. I wrote an article about this. On the right, during the residential institutions where we've all had to have a reckoning of what our country did to indigenous peoples here with I don't call them schools, I call them institutions because my school didn't have a cemetery attached to it. I don't know if yours did. They did. The institutions, those are hard lessons we as Canadians have to learn. And that has led to a lot of historical analysis. Should we take down a statue of Langevin, the Langevin block where the Prime Ministers used to work, and we no longer call it that, we call it the Prime Minister's office? Yeah, because Langevin was the architect of the residential institution system. And what about Sir John A. Macdonald? Oh my God, that's a big debate, right? Everyone's got an opinion. The National Post, when they discovered the unmarked graves, the National Post had a picture not of the students of us, of which there have been thousands according to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but they had pictures of Sir John A. Macdonald. Like, the real victim of the residential school and institution system is Sir John A. Macdonald. Like, wait a second. He's not a victim. I mean, whether we take up or down the statue is a legitimate debate, whether maybe we should have context. But I call that stolen victimization. Let's keep our eye on the main thing. The main victims were kids, right? Kids who were ripped out of families' arms and told to go to school and told not, like we're Jews. Imagine if someone took our children and said they can no longer speak Hebrew, they can no longer talk about Judaism, they can no longer see, many of them will disappear. Of course, it's an outrageous system. Those are the victims. The victim, now, Sir John A. is a debate, but he's not a victim. But the right elevated him to the victim. The left has done the same thing with multiple things. You cannot have open discussions about things for the fear of being canceled. And there is a race to see who has the deepest grievance and who is the deepest victim. And people lead off with this identity politics. You know, on the left, man can't write in a woman's voice anymore, right? You have to lead with your own experience. And politicians often say, you know, look, it's good to acknowledge our biases or our privileges and our blind spots. I get that. But we're human beings. And the great muscle of social democracy and society is empathy. It's not about because I'm the same as you that I love you. It's not because we have the same background that I want to help you or that I care about you. It's that you're a human being. That has been the fundamental foundation of most religions. But in society, I'll just tell one more thing, because this hurt. I had a very well, I won't say his name, but very well-known black activist here in Canada. Very well-known. And he wrote me a long letter and called me a white supremacist. Okay. And it was because I had, done some coverage, and I had done coverage where, I'm for the unending fight against racism and bias. Who isn't? But he said that wasn't enough. As a white person, I'm part of the problem. I'm a white supremacist, and I wouldn't understand what he's talking about. I said, it's interesting that you call me a white supremacist. I said, I don't think that term is very helpful. And I get that it's vogue to talk about white supremacy now. But, as a Jew, if the white supremacists took over, you'd be in trouble, but so would I. I think we'd be in the same train. And he said, no. Now, I'm not speaking for his experience, but what it showed me was we are living in a society where we have lost proportionality. And this is the real thing. The outrage machine that we live in, the grievance politics machine, is the machine of where there's no proportionality, where you can't be mildly this or mildly that. It's a society of extremes. And I'll give you an idea. Friends of mine at Abacus Data, Bruce Anderson, who's a pollster, Abacus Data is very reputable. They decided to do a poll on what Canadians believe now, because are these anecdotes, like I know a guy that called me this, or I know a guy that called me this. But let me give you some data. Because this is where grievance politics, weaponized by politicians and social media, here's the world we're living in right now. This poll is from about 2 months ago. 44% of people polled, which is a very reputable poll, this would translate into 13 million Canadians, believe, quote, wars, recessions, and election outcomes are controlled by a small group of people, often working secretly against us. By the way, as Jews, this should not make us feel good, because we are often labeled the small group of people. 44% of Canadians agree with that. Elections, wars, and recessions are a little group of secret elite people controlling it. Or, quote, their lives are controlled by plots. 44% of people agree with that. An Abacus Data survey. 37% of people asked in this survey, of over 1,500 people, so plus or minus 3%, or which would translate into 11 million Canadians, quote, there are a group of people trying to replace us native-born thinkers with immigrants with the same views as them. In other words, 37% of Canadians, or 11 million people, believe in replacement theory. We're a society of immigrants. That's amazing. I'll give you one more. 20% of Canadians in survey believe the World Economic Forum, which is a gathering in Switzerland of business people and politicians, is a secret group of global cabal, quote, trying to control the world, and 13% overall believe that Bill Gates is using microchips to track and control their lives. And 27% say it's somewhat likely. Like, I find those shocking stats. I don't know if you do. That's Canada, where we have a huge social system to care for people, and yet you're talking about 44% of Canadians basically don't believe that democracy is functioning properly anymore, that it's basically a group of hyper-elites. By the way, these two, there's different, you break it down left and right, but there's this sense that people don't believe in there's a justice, they don't believe they got a fair shot, they don't believe in merit, and they've decided that there's no way out except grievance. They're angry, and they're ready to burn it down. And we're seeing it in societies all over. Liberal democracies are under threat around the world. Freedom House, which measures democracies in the world in the last 20 years, if you looked in the 90s, post-90s, you know, the Soviet Union breaks up, democracies around the world are on the rise. Now, if you look at the Freedom House Index, every single day democracies are on the decline. Democracy, more countries are turning away from democracy. People don't want it. They want strong men. They are turning away because they don't believe society's function. And I find that very disturbing. And that is where grievance politics goes from, you know, the trucker protest was just an appetizer. It was just a kind of, here, do you really want to know what's going on in you people who live in the Ottawa bubble? This is the world. This is what it is. And they served it up for us on the front porch for 3 weeks to say, here, on one side, you've got the elites living in a bubble, doing your policies, thinking everyone's great. And out there on the other extreme are people that are driving their trucks through 2,000 kilometers to try to burn it down. Most of us live somewhere in between. But this world, when you start doing polls, is a powerful world. And I'm nervous about the rise of grievance politics. And so, as I was thinking about today, I was thinking, how do I measure how we all grieve for something that we've lost, and how we turn to hope, and how societies are grieving for real things that they've lost, and they're turning to cynicism and grievance. Because they've lost something. Governments and societies have to realize that there's a whole bunch of people that feel hopeless, and they don't have a way to turn in. Now, why? Well, maybe it's the loss of churches, synagogues, mosques, mediating structures. Fewer people go, families have broken down, people have been isolated with COVID, right? So social hyper-atomization of society, isolation. Social media allows people not to actually debate, but just have a confirmation bias in their own little world. Like, I believe in the World Economic Forum is bad, and you can read 1,000 different blogs on that, and you can live in that world, and that becomes your world. You know, they used to say there's not two political parties in the United States now. They say there's two different realities in the United States. The people who vote Republican watch a certain type of news, and the people that vote Democrat watch another news. And it's not like they watch the same thing and then they debate it. They don't even talk anymore. It's like, this is my world, and it's a very ecologically well-populated world on both sides. You don't need to leave it to find out a point of reference. And so the things that we have common references for are gone. And so grievance is the loss of belief in institutions and narratives. And then what happens is you need a sense of belonging. And the other thing that struck me about the truckers, and you'll strike you at any rally, is they loved it. The thing that you don't see on the news is how happy the people there were, because they were part of a community. And finally they were part of a community. They'd been lonely, and they'd been lost. And then, people were like, oh, they had a hot tub on Wellington in front of Parliament at -20, and people were like, it's so stupid. They were so happy. They brought their children. There was children and laundry and hot tubs, and they were shoveling snow. And they were like, you never put that on the news, Evan. I know, because, we don't need you to take over our city and shovel snow. We have taxes for that. Like, when your neighbor takes over your house and says, oh, you want it back? How about giving me some credit for mowing your lawn? It's like, get out of my house. It doesn't work like that. But what was interesting is that they loved it because they had a sense of belonging. And people need a tribe. And the sense of belonging, politicians who are weaponizing this, they get it. People are dying to belong. And someone asked me, a politician asked me, actually, it was the current governor of the Bank of Canada. So I'm talking about leads, I'm having lunch with him. And he said to me this, riddle me this, why do people follow someone like Donald Trump? What's your theory? When they know, especially people of a lower income, when they know he's going to make their lives worse, like he will not help them economically. The system that he's asking, tax cuts for the rich, no social assistance, no medical insurance, everything that he is promising will make 90% of the people at his rallies worse. And they love him. He said, this keeps me up at night. Like, how do we communicate and help people when the people who are hating us are voting for someone who is actively will make their life worse? And I'm trying to make their life better. I just can't figure it out. And it's a real riddle for people, because once these people belong to that tribe of anger and grievance, they lose touch. There's a principle in economics, I'm sure many of you know better than me, an Italian economist called Pareto. And there's lots of things called relative income. And basically, like if my cousin Mike, very successful, if he's making $10 million a year, and I'm making $45,000 a year, and the next year he makes $20 million a year, but the next year I make $46,000, I'm okay with that because we're both going up. And even though he's making a lot more, I'm still going up. But if he's making $60,000 and the next year makes $70,000, but I make $40,000 and I make $30,000 the next year, and I'm going down while he's incrementally going up, it's worse. And people get angry. And one of the things that sociologists say about this current grievance politics is people are they disbelieve that a liberal or a Democrat will make their lives better, and they disbelieve that a conservative or a Republican will make their lives better because they think the system's broken. They have lost belief. They don't care. They've been losing for generations. Their lives didn't get better under Obama. They didn't get better under Bush. They're losing. Their inequality is getting worse. So you know what they want to do? They say, look, this is great. I'm going to lose either way, but this guy is going to give me an opportunity to punch someone in the nose going down. They give you power. You know what? Both of these elites are untrustworthy. But this guy will give me a chance to burn it down. So yeah, am I going to suffer? I'm suffering anyway. But I'm going to go down with the dignity of punching him in the nose. And they love it. And the anger that is pervasive is the anger just to burn something down because they're feeling that they have no power. And that's the last power you have, is the power to destroy. Much more difficult to build than to burn. In politics, everybody knows that. Hard to build, easy to burn. It is the oldest maxim. It's easy to light a fire, hard to build a house. Right? We know it. Everyone here, how many could you build your own house? Probably not. Could you burn your own house down? Barrier to entry is very low. And so that's what anger is. That's what it metastasizes, and that's what grievance is. So I was thinking about that. And then, but the problem with it is it burns out. Like once you're selling anger, first you say, the government sucks. Barry Goldwater, Ronald Reagan, and you can go back to the first generation but then you have to, it's like a drug. In order to get the impact, you have to up the dose. So first you don't trust the government, then they're corrupt, then they're more corrupt, then actually it's not just the big government's corrupt and the deep state is corrupt, it's also big media is corrupt, big pharma's corrupt, big tech is corrupt, everybody's in on it. And then when that doesn't get people to come march, the next phase is you have to basically convince people that they're running pedophile ringers in pizza parlors, like QAnon. Like the dosage gets so high up because people, as G.K. Chesterton said famously, when people stop believing in God, it's not that they'll believe in nothing, it's that they will believe in anything. And politicians know that. When you stop believing in the system, it's not that they stop believing in anything, it's that they'll believe in whatever crazy thing is out there. And people do that, as you've seen. So here we are in that world, and society does not have, when they lose something, what we have. When I lost my dad, we had the Shiva, and then we had the Shloshim, and we have the 11th month. And next week we'll have the unveiling. We don't have a community. That helped us turn grief to hope and set the path of belief back towards something. I was thinking about that as a Jew on Yom Kippur, as we refract this through our teachings today, and I'll kind of wrap up here in a minute. Judaism has long struggled with the grief and grievance dynamic because the relationship we have with God has been one of a struggle to understand injustice. God's impatience with our own failings towards injustice and our impatience with God's pernicious ways that are mysterious to us. Whether it's Abraham arguing with God over Sodom and Gomorrah. God says, this is a terrible place, I'm going to go destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham, with the chutzpah of the Jew, says, really, would you destroy this city for, what if I find 50 good people there? Would you destroy everybody for want of 50? And God says, and then he says, well, what if I only find 45? It's like, would you destroy Sodom and Gomorrah for want of 5? And then Abraham keeps at it until they get down to 10. Like this is God. He's not talking to the shopkeeper. God's like, look, at 10, and so you can't find 10, I'm still wrecking it. God actually comes through and he brings out Lot and the family. But they argue with God back and forth about justice because things are unfair. Job is the classic example. Obviously, Job, a righteous man, there's a bet between Satan and God, and they decide to use Job in a terrible way. Job's livid about it. Job puts God on trial. He talks to his friends, puts God on trial. Like, why are you doing this? And this has happened many, many times. Moses does the same when the golden calf. God says, that's it with these people. I'm going to destroy them. And I'll remember God says to Moses, that's it. They're stiff-necked people. I'm going to destroy you, and I'll keep you, and we'll start a whole new line. And Moses says, God, what would that look like if you take everybody out of Egypt, then you destroy them? People would never trust you again. He gives these are classic, what they call, these legal arguments. And God responds to Job, to Abraham, to Moses, to Jeremiah. There's many examples. And what this says is Jews have struggled with this notion of grief, loss, injustice, when bad things happen to good people, the problem of evil, all those things. And we don't give up on it. We don't give up into grievance and destruction. Job, in the end, doesn't say, you know what, you're a pernicious God who have used me and abetted and destroyed me. The answer in the end is he feels a presence of God that he doesn't understand. He's confused at a very high level, but he believes it. Abraham too, whether it's Sodom and Gomorrah or, let's be clear, the passage that we meditate on today, the Akedah, Mount Moriah, when imagine God says to him, we're going to, please take your son up to Mount Moriah and sacrifice him. I mean, it's such a powerful story. We use that story to say, it was a test of faith, but why didn't Abraham argue with God then? Why was he arguing for Sodom and Gomorrah, but not for Isaac, his only son? And then when he actually gets his hand stayed, kind of awkward moment between Abraham and Isaac after. You know, they never talk right after. They go down the mountain. Obviously, what's the next conversation you have with your dad after he's lashed you to a sacrifice and raised a knife to you? Say, Dad, what were you thinking? He's like, nothing. He leaves. But Abraham still has faith in God, even though God has asked him to do that. And Isaac still has faith. Even Isaac, who's been unjustly used. So Jews have this covenant to turn grief, injustice, and pain not into grievance, but into hope. And God has the same covenant with us. And I'll read you a passage from Eric Fromm, who you probably all know, about the radical nature of what it means to grieve. And I think this is what our world needs. Eric Fromm writes, with the conclusion of the covenant, God ceases to be the absolute ruler. He and humankind have become partners in a treaty. God is transformed from an absolute to a constitutional monarch. He is bound as we are bound to the conditions of this Constitution. God lost his freedom to be arbitrary, and we gained our freedom to challenge God in the name of God's own promises, in the name of God's own principles that are laid out in the covenant. That's the deal for us, that we believe that God is bound by normative moral standards the same way we are, and that there's a relationship, the brit, the covenant. I think in secular world, the covenant with a normal standard is breaking. And the grievance politics is cutting the threads of that covenant that we have, that we can all live together, left, right, different colors, different genders, different sexualities, whatever we are, that we can live together with the covenant that we're going to fail often, but that the covenant is to live together and to speak together and understand together, and not to be the victims, not to be defined by the bad thing, to become perpetually a victim and therefore a grievance. We're the people of the Holocaust. We have grievances. And we have grief. But we have transformed that not into forgetting, but into action and hope and building, into Israel, into communities like this. And I think we have to be very careful in our secular lives politically to avoid being trapped into the grievance politics and to adhere to something different, which is not to... Grievances are about breaking, and grief is about building. It's 11 months since my dad passed, and we are building a relationship back into a new life. My mom's building a new life. Our family's building a new life. All of us have lost people in our lives and have grieved. And the grief is about building on loss, not marinating in the anger of the injustice of it. Now, losing your father's not, it's easier to do than losing a child. I understand. There's lots of levels of injustice. But I would just ask you now, as I open up the floor, I'll just leave you with this. My dad said this just before he died. And we're putting on a stone next week. And he said, chase your dreams. Do not let anything stop you. Do not let anything get in your way. There will be challenges, but you will overcome them. Just know the world is an endless source of good. I love you. Those were his last words to his grandkids. And we think about that a lot, because I think about that politically. The world is an endless source of good. That's hard in this world to think of. But I think what he left us with when he said, I love you, is that the basic seed that we never talk about in politics is love. And I don't know why we don't ever talk about that in secular society. Like, when was the last time a politician said, you know, we don't talk, like, love is at the heart of the democratic experiment. That's what the founding fathers talk a lot about. The good intermingling between the moral learning of religion and the secular democracies that have built institutions and kept us safe and allowed the arc of history to bend towards justice begins at love. And I think that's why he ended saying I love you, because when you're down, that's what you think about. So I would just say this, as we get into a hyper-polarized world here in Canada and around the world, I hope we can turn away from grievance. Doesn't mean you don't have to be angry, or I hope we debate, I hope we exchange passionate ideas and disagree. But there's a difference between always feeling that you're victimized and that you're a grievance person, and turn our societies a little more towards the argument of hope, not the argument of destruction. So I would love if you want to talk about CTV and Lisa LaFlamme or grievance, whatever you guys want to talk about. I'm happy to do. I don't know how much time we have, but that is kind of what I was meditating on for the last, we have time, for the last kind of, I guess from the last little while. And I'm concerned, and I don't know if anybody of you are concerned, many of you have lived all over the world, if we are living in a world that is increasingly dangerous, increasingly, and you know, a young person used a word to me, my kids' age, that I had never heard. They said, you know what, you never talk about dad. I thought, well, you know, there's also something people call climate grieving. I never even heard of it. There's young people that are grieving because they don't believe that they're ever going to have a good climate. Like, I never heard that term. I don't know if you guys have heard that. That they are so concerned. It's like the way we used to think about the bomb. And in the Cold War, that we were like, oh, we live in this kind of accident. It could all end at any time because of a nuclear holocaust. That's what our generation was, our exit. They have that reasserting itself in Russia. Plus, they think about that as a climate grieving. That, you know, they'll never be able to live by the ocean, or they won't have fresh water, or like, these are real things. So does anyone want to talk about, you know, just your own, or share any concerns you may have about the political divisiveness, or your own sense of, yeah, go ahead.
As far as I'm concerned, there's a problem with loneliness right now in the world. And what I would be most interested in talking about is what you're saying about Judaism. Judaism is much more focused, as much as it has a big picture, it also is much more on the family. And I'm convinced that the breakdown of the nuclear family is really at the heart of a lot of this stuff. Whenever I hear people complaining, I feel like saying, could you please tell me about your youth? What was it like? Did you have a parent? What was your family life? And I think there's been a breakdown of the family life, and when instead of taking a lot of the unresolved issues from their family life, gets displaced into a becoming social activist, and they just wanted, they didn't have their own family life.
Yeah, first of all, I think there's two different things. Loneliness is probably a big issue in general, probably more than we talk about it. The lack of community affects people a lot. And I think that was hyper-emphasized during COVID, to isolate, and that isolation caused huge damage. Just in terms of the family, I think any study talks about the importance of social structures, like the sociologist, you probably all remember that book, Bowling Alone. They all talk about happiness, social capital being the key determinant of happiness. What is social capital? Your family, your community, your friend group. And you know, when people are lonely, partly they don't have social capital. They haven't joined a club or a religious organization or a group, or they may not have a family. So you're right. But I often don't blame the people, like, why are families breaking down? I mean, there's so much economic inequality, there's so much addiction issue, mental health issue, there's just a lot, and communities that have broken down, and severe pressures on the family. The other thing is, the family broke, and again, this is not my theory, but I think it's an interesting one. As, let's say from 1970 to 2022, we have seen a marked decline in memberships of churches, synagogues, and mosques. We've seen clubs, memberships go down. We've seen the hyper-privatization of organizations. We've seen salaries not being able to keep up. People, the hyper-suburbanization, so people live in big suburbs, so there's much more isolation. So public spaces have gone down. There's very few public, you have to drive everywhere. And the family had to take on a lot more social capital role in the last 50 years than in any time in history. The pressures that the family, like before, if you lived in a small community, the family was one unit, but you were always at your friend's house because they were right next door, and the school, and the club, and the synagogue, and the church. And people, the community bore a lot of the social weight. And that took care of a lot of social stresses. You still see it in some stuff. But that atomized as people started to isolate. And the family was the last kind of unit, and it got crushed. People couldn't handle it. The family structure could not bear the load. And that's been one of the issues as societies disintermediate. The family is asked to bear the load that society used to bear because we don't invest in public structures. Again, these are those terms, mediating structures, to help mediate the stresses. I think you're right, families got crushed, and you're seeing the result. That's a great point. My mom, this will be smart.
Well, two things. First of all, I think that the lack of a social structure, to a large extent, is attributed to an individual's dependence on their personal media, their iPhone. So many of our younger generation are completely wrapped up in technology, which individuates them. So it negates the sense of community completely. But on another note, when you talk about basically voice appropriation, how dare you speak to my reality? You can never understand my lived experience as a member of a group if you were not part of that group. We have to remember that the act of imagination, I think imagination is a very key word here, because when you can imagine, then you can live in someone else's reality. You can write about their group and their experience. And the effects on culture, on literature, are so devastating when we hear these arguments about voice appropriation. And again, it negates the sense of intercommunication. We can never get along with people if we can't have that dialogue with them.
I think it cuts both ways too, Mama. You're right. We need new voices. New voices need space. But you're right. I mean, I know I do work in academics. I'm just going to ask you, this is a big debate there, right? Like about who can speak for what. Adam. I'm just picking on him because he's teaching now. But these are very cogent debates in academia.
I'm more optimistic about it from 20-year-olds than I am from the people in this room, including myself. I think they're really empathetic. I think 20-year-olds now are more empathetic or better at empathizing with each other, whether it's online or elsewhere, than any generation ever before, as individuals. And I think they have that. They're afraid. They have distrust of those larger institutions, including the ones that they're in, like academic institutions. But I think they are deeply attuned to wanting to reach out to other people and just trying to figure out ways to do it that don't feel, Anyway, so to me I wouldn't underestimate.
Yeah, I agree. Josh?
I was wondering, in your personal grief journey, you had structure. You mentioned Shiva, Shloshini. When you think of the grievances of the people that you met, or when you think of those 20-year-olds who are empathetic and looking for a forum or a structure, what do you see? I guess when you talk about that optimism,
Yeah.
where is it going to be housed? Because I think the lack of ritual forums creates a problem.
I think, just picking up on what Josh, what you're saying, what Adam just said. So grief when we're grieving, like for me, grief at the injustice of a loss, or just a loss. But grief in the form that we try to mediate it towards is a pathway towards mending the world, because we believe the world's better, right? So I'm taking the grief path on the assumption that I want to mend the world. Grievance is taking a path to break the world, right? So that's the difference to me between grief and grievance. I think that young people, like Adam's talking about young people, they are grief. They have mistrust, and they have anger, and they have grief at climate loss, or grief at the political, or they don't have optimism that they're going to have a better life than their parents. Lots of things. But they are joining things. There is bigger climate activism than we've ever seen. They're doing a lot, and the positive side of it is they're doing it to mend the world, right? There is the way we are grieving. So the people that are involved politically, and millions of people, so these are descriptive categories. Most people are sensing loss, anger, frustration, pain, fear, but they take a road that ultimately they hope leads to mend the world. What my concern is there are political leaders who are using that and morphing it into grievance, and the purpose is to break the world. Because in breaking it, they get power. I mean, this is not that sophisticated stuff. It's about power. And the arson impulse on lots of sides is to just break. And it's antithetical to us in our grieving. And I think for my kids are in first and second year university, they are not anarchists. They're involved in things to mend the world. I mean, they're on a mission to make the world better. But boy, it's hard you could take a lot of the folks I met had tried that. They had felt that was a mug's game. And they were like, you know what? There is no way. That's a trick. And I don't believe it. And now I'm going to just take the grievance road. And what I want to do, if I can do nothing else, I'm just going to bust the world. And they're being led by people. And I think that's where we are in real. I mean, again, I cited that I don't like to come to a shul and cite a poll, but, that's not insignificant to think how many people don't believe that there's a path to mend the world, that the path is landmine, so they might as well just get off of it. Mike?
But how much do you think, and I know you said the politicians a lot, but how much do you think that, and being in media, that media plays to that? Because you have the 24-hour news cycle that I have to keep you engaged. So I'm going to keep you engaged with fear and hate and whichever, knowing that targets this specific audience, which is going to, feed my advertisers, as opposed to say that news channel or that news channel.
Yeah, I think you're not wrong. I mean, everybody's trying to aggregate eyeballs for money and aggregate membership, build communities, because it's a shattered world. It's very hard to create communities. And as I say, the easiest way to do it is through fear and anger. I mean, we know that, right? And pick a fight. You're never as close to your neighbor until someone tries to burn both your houses, and then suddenly you're partners. You'll die for each other. And so the media does it too, of course. There's an ecosystem here that's symbiotic, like it's feeding off each other, and it's not great. So I totally get that. But in the end, always these criticisms of the media is the same. In the end, we have to decide what side we're on here. Like, that's in the end. Are we going to always find a narrative that makes us into a victim of something? Like, that we're always victimized by big tech or big media or big politics. In the end, we're trying to create a society where we can disagree peacefully. That's what a democracy is. You and I and you, and we all have radically different views, but we can disagree peacefully, we can be prosperous, we can educate our kids, but we agree on some foundational ethical, moral ideas about what kind of society we want to live on, whatever those natural laws are. We can debate whether everyone deserves free medical care or not? That's a debate. But societies are going to have those debates. But that's different than a debate that says you belong here and you don't. Get out. That's a totally different debate. Or you're corrupt. Like your beliefs are a corrupt belief. And the other thing is, the old saying, you're entitled to your own opinion, but not your own facts. The abandonment of just basic reason makes, and just going back to talking to, and I spent 3 weeks, and I really had a mission there to talk to people. I knew that they didn't like me. But I really got to know a lot of those people. In fact, by the end, I was quite tight with them. It was hilarious. They were like, Evan, you're such a Nazi. It's like, good to see you. Actually, the funniest moment was I was on the street with one guy late at night, and he had come up to me. He's a big guy. And he said, I know, I hate your, I think you're mainstream media and you're corrupt, but you've been out here every day. I keep seeing you, and I actually give you some credit for actually talking to me, and you're always out there. And I just want to ask you, how do you live with yourself when you're spraying the government's lies and the lies about? There's just two guys talking. So this is the kind of, and then 3 drunk. They were sort of, maybe they weren't drunk. They were liquored up. Young trucker guys came over, and they, I guess, saw me talking to him. And they go, but my cameras were there, so they assumed, they go, oh, you Nazis. And then this guy turns and goes, do you know this guy's Jewish? He's not a Nazi. And then the other guys go, well, then you're a Nazi. And then he goes, I'm not a Nazi, I'm a protester like you. And he's like, well, you're not. And I'm like, guys, no one's a Nazi here. It's like, it was just so clear. It was literally, my camera guy's like, what is happening here, right? This guy's defending me, and these guys. So it's just like, but you realize you're in this, you're just spiraling. And it was kind of like, guys, just calm down. Why don't we have a conversation? And they're human beings under there, but they're fearful and they're lost, and there's no reason. And that energy can be very dangerous collectively. Funny anecdotally, dangerous collectively. And it's out there. It's out there. So that's all I'd say. Is the media part of it? 100%. My job, I would say, is to get out there and do just my antidote to that is literally the only way to do it is to be there and to talk to people, not talk at people like we're doing now. Yes, sir.
I'm not part of a grievance. I'm going to talk about these guys in the trucking protests and the lower socioeconomic and maybe education. And Trump is their guy and he's going to punch people in the face. That doesn't explain how many people support Trump, who have money, who have education. Doesn't explain how many Jewish people support Trump, or should have Jews. So this idea that it's economic doesn't seem to really address that problem.
Yeah, I would say it's more, I'm being descriptive, it's more complicated. Obviously, actually more people of high economic stature voted for Trump than for Hillary Clinton, just for the record. So you're right about that. The dividing lines in America are very different. It's not just red-blue. It's those who are benefiting from globalization and those who are not. That would be to me, the most significant line is, do you think in the coming changes of globalization, AI, global trade, high education, you are going to be a beneficiary of that, or are you going to lose? This is why Republicans and Democrats alike both voted against NAFTA. They hate free trade because most of their voters, they know, are not going to benefit from globalization. There's going to be a reckoning, an employment reckoning. And globalization, the champions of globalization, again, which we grew up with, they're losing. Globalization was more complicated. It wasn't just free trade is a rising tide that lifts all boats. It's a rising tide that lifts some boats really high, drains a lot of boats, takes jobs from the Rust Belt here over to China and Vietnam and Mexico. It's a very complicated thing. So you have super rich people and well-off people that love Trump because they're voting on different vectors, right? They want to protect their neighborhood. There's a lot of fear about integration and neighborhood, so there was a lot of that. There was a lot of, look, the Jewish community, and we can get into it, it's a complicated thing, and it's a real thing, but the Jewish community, which was classically left and has now shifted a lot to the right, has a lot to do with a strongman view of, and a frustration with the Palestinian and the Arab world culture, that a crisis that we've lived with for 70 years. And they want someone, I'm going to go a little deep, but the fusion of right-wing evangelicals and right-wing Jews has been one of the fascinating turns in American politics. Right-wing evangelicals who believe in the Messianic second coming and the eschatology and the Red Bull, and they fused themselves to the Jewish community, to Israel, to protect Israel from the Muslims, because that was where they believe that is where the second coming will happen. And that turned them into radically pro-Israel supporters. Pro-Israel is a crazy term, in my view, because it's not like you're pro-Israel or anti-Israel, only people who don't understand. It's not like if you vote for Stephen Harper and you vote for Justin Trudeau, you're not pro-Canada or anti-Canada, you're liberal or conservative. In Israel, you're either pro-Israel or which is such a ridiculous term. Israel is as fraught with multiple points of view as Canada or the United States, as we all know. But the right-wing evangelical Christians who raise more money, and since Jerry Falwell and the moral majority, and there's a long trajectory that they're powerful influence on the Republican Party. They're very powerful within the Republican Party, and they're very pro-Israel. And that benefits people who are interested in the security of Israel. And so Trump, who evangelicals like, and I don't know about you, but nothing about his life has screamed out pastoral. But, they say he's my president, not my pastor. Okay. But, here he is, carrying the Bible upside down. They love him because these are useful alliances, right? No one takes him seriously as a moral religious figure, but he is a powerful political figure for them. And he knows that. So he has usefully turned from a New York Democrat to a hard right evangelical Christian Republican. So that's just a very specific American political dynamic of conveniences as those alliances shifted. I don't know if that helps you.
That's good. It's funny, you also mentioned politicians should talk about love more often.
Yeah.
When you think of Donald Trump, he talks about love all the time. His love of protesters, his love of his supporters.
Yeah. No, it's true. I don't think I mean it in the same way. I just mean, like they all say I love America or I love Canada. They all say that. I'm just talking about love in the religious term of loving your fellow human being. Right? Like it's hard for Donald Trump to talk about love when he describes African countries as shitholes. I just don't see Rabbi Akiva saying the same thing. I just don't, again, I'm not saying we should sugarcoat everything. There's problems, and countries have values, and countries have borders, and countries have legitimate systems that they have to protect. But you don't have to protect your own values by shutting down others. I guess that, and there's lots of minorities, in America and Canada that, not even minorities, majorities, women right now in the debate in the court. I mean, these are legitimate debates. I'm not weighing in on the merits of it, but it does seem that things are erring on the divisive side, not necessarily on the grievance side, not necessarily on the unity side. I know we're all hungry, but yes. First of all, hi.
Is there a formula for getting that love aspect into the media? You don't hear that. I hear all the intellectual arguments, and I only watch, the pro-left side, so I only sort of get that, and that semi-uplifts me. But then, even they're not saying that, they should be, inviting the opposition in, and maybe they do. Anyway, as you answer.
I'm with you. I think we just got to talk. I mean that, I'm leaving this, we're moving, but one of the things I love about my daily talk radio show is, yeah, I just talk to anybody. And I tell the screener, you know, if they say, oh, I'm an anti-vaxxer, I don't care. Like, they want to talk. And we should have a normal, we should be able to disagree like human beings. And I really believe that. And, you know, I love politics. I'm not a cynic. I'm a skeptical optimist. I'm very skeptical that governments will do good. I'm skeptical of most things, but I'm not a cynic. But I do believe fundamentally, and this is my own belief, I think it's our religious belief. I think it was Job's belief. I think it was Abraham's belief. I think it's a Judeo-covenant that fundamentally people want community. They want something to build up, and they want some hope. Yes?
How can you generate hope? And who's responsible for generating that hope? If people do not buy into the system because they have no future in it, why should they care?
Look, I mean, I feel like this is so interesting question. Why should people care? Because these is like in the post-war period, like this was so stylish when people would be like, okay, let's become existentialists and let's all, you know, the world doesn't matter, and everyone was, you know, reading Camus like it was hot stuff. Because the thing about hope is it's just you can't extinguish it. Like our systems are strained, but they're not broken. You know, our systems are still functioning at a very high level. We're living longer. We have more patents. We have lots of discoveries. Kids are still being born. People are going to school. People still make love. They fall in love. They have a laugh. They go to a comedy show. They listen to a piece of music, and there's a tear in the veil of the universe, and you see a light. That you see the tail lights of God, kind of. You're like, oh my God, I feel it. And you feel it. Like, this is not a secret. We all have glimpses of the holy, the stopping of the world. And those glimpses lure us towards hope. Kids have it, adults have it, old people have it. Even when your heart's palpitating because your mortgage is going up, you still have it. And I do believe that you channel those hope, as I say, towards systems that, communities that build up structures that build positive things. Synagogues, schools, hockey teams. Like look, the world is built on tiny networks, from you talk about the family to the hockey team and the choir and the community. And people, in every time you join some of those, you feel it. And to me, that's one on the good side of the ledger. And I actually think that's the dam against the hopelessness. And then there's ingenuity, there's technical ingenuity that will help us, which solves our problems. But I would say this isn't the darkest period in history. I feel like this is like gloomy. Like, we've been in a much darker period before. This is a, the lights are dimming a little, but it's not pitch black out there. And so I just think, just going back to what Adam said, or my kids, they're hopeful. They have big challenges. We didn't exactly leave them the perfect world, but I feel that they're smarter and better hands, and probably they know more than we knew. So I feel maybe I'm hopeful. I could leave you on that. Diana would insist that I do. Josh.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Evan. I was a young kid in the 80s in Ottawa, and Truth was Norton Nash, the CDC, Barbara Frum. And it fills me with pride that for many years, Truth in Ottawa, amongst my previous life, was listening to you. And I did not know that your family were members until I moved to Toronto. And so I know all of us have been very proud of you and very excited for your new role. And we hope that you'll continue to share truth and give voice to people who need to be heard. The Yom Kippur afternoon service begins at 3:30 in the sanctuary and is available in person and on live stream for members of the congregation. There will be 2 Yizkor services at approximately 5:15 in the main sanctuary, and at approximately 5:30, a different service will be available in the Mishkan where we are right now.
At approximately 6:15, there will be Nahila in the main sanctuary, and at 6:45, there will be a family Nahila service. Members of the congregation will be meeting on Bathurst Street Plaza for Havdalah and the final shofar blast at approximately 7:30, followed by honey cake, which someone who's Sephardic, it's been a pleasure to discover that Ashkenazi delight, and some sweet wine. So to all of you, Gemar Chatzma Tova. Thank you again.